12-year-old girl's letter shocks the president, his response stuns the nation. There was once a small town, hidden away on the map, along a harsh and unforgiving border. This town had lost nearly everything, its law, its hope, and even its future. Yet amidst its desolation, a letter from a 12-year-old girl shook an entire nation. Can a small, desperate act spark hope? Can one voice, no matter how young, change the fate of hundreds of lives? This is the story of Sophia, a girl who poured all her hope, her fears, and her courage into a single piece of paper. That letter, written under the dim light of a kerosene lamp, would ignite a spark in a world consumed by darkness. There are places that don't appear on the map, places forgotten by the world, yet these hidden corners often hold the most heartbreaking stories. This small town on the southern border was once a peaceful haven for hundreds of families. Its streets bustled with life, its people shared meals, laughter, and dreams. But that was a long time ago. Now the town stood as a ghost of its former self. Empty streets, shuttered windows, and silence hung in the air. Fear whispered in every corner, echoing louder than any voice dared to speak. In the middle of this decay lived Sophia. She was just 12 years old, but she had already known more loss and grief than many face in a lifetime. Her father, a truck driver respected for his integrity, had once been a pillar of the community, but his honesty came at a devastating price. One fateful day, he refused to transport a shipment for the local gang, a decision that cost him his life. "They killed him," Sophia would later recount, her voice trembling with both pain and defiance. "Right there, on the street, in front of our house." Her mother had grabbed her arm and whispered, "Don't look outside. Don't cry. Silence is the only way to survive." But Sophia couldn't live like that anymore. Not in silence, not in fear. Ever since her father's death, Sophia and her mother had lived under the gang's oppressive rule. The town's residents didn't truly live, they merely existed. People who tried to leave were hunted down. Those who resisted, they were punished in ways too cruel to describe. But one quiet evening, Sophia decided she couldn't take it anymore. Under the dim glow of a kerosene lamp, she opened a crumpled piece of paper and began to write. "Dear Mr. President," she began, her small hands trembling as she held the pen, "if you're reading this letter, please come help us. This town is no longer a home. The adults are terrified, and we, the children, have no future. I don't know if this letter will ever reach you, but if no one does anything, nothing will ever change." Sophia's words carried the raw innocence and desperation of a child who had seen far too much. When she finished, she carefully folded the letter and tucked it into her jacket. She didn't sleep that night. She simply stared at the ceiling, clutching her letter and her fragile hope. The next morning, Sophia walked to the bus stop. She was determined to find the one person she trusted to deliver her message, the last bus driver who still passed through the town. The driver looked at her with concern and hesitation. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "Sending this letter is like gambling with your life." Sophia nodded. "I don't have any other choice," she said. The bus rumbled out of town, carrying Sophia's letter and her slim thread of hope with it. Could a simple piece of paper, written by the hand of a child, change the fate of an entire town consumed by darkness? The letter began its journey, passing from hand to hand, from the bus driver to a small-town postal worker, and then to the desk of a seasoned journalist. This journalist had spent his career uncovering stories the world preferred to ignore. When he opened Sophia's letter, the shaky handwriting stopped him in his tracks. He read it aloud to a colleague. "A child wrote this," he said, his voice quiet but heavy with emotion. His calloused hands trembled as he held the paper. "We adults have stayed silent for far too long, but this little girl, she refuses to accept that." The letter was more than a plea for help. It was a mirror reflecting the indifference of a world that had turned its back. The journalist couldn't ignore it. He immediately penned a detailed exposé. His article revealed the horrifying reality of life in the town, sharing Sophia's letter with the world. He sent the report, along with Sophia's letter, to a trusted friend, a senior national security advisor at the White House. One quiet morning, the letter landed on the president's desk. Accompanied by the journalist's report, it demanded attention. As the president read Sophia's simple yet powerful words, the room fell silent. "Mr. President," the letter began again, "if you're reading this letter, please come. Our town is dying in darkness." The president set the letter down, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. Sophia's letter wasn't just a cry for help. It was a challenge to act, to care, to remember that even in the darkest places, there are voices that refuse to be silenced. And this voice, the voice of a 12-year-old girl, had reached the highest office in the land. What happened next would stun an entire nation. But one thing was already clear: the courage of a single child had begun to change the course of history. What if we chose courage like Sophia? What if we didn't wait for someone else to act? Sometimes all it takes is one voice to light the way. The president sat in silence, his mind heavy with thought as he turned toward the advisors waiting nearby. His voice, low and steady, broke the tension. How could this happen in our country? One advisor, hesitant but composed, spoke up cautiously. "Sir, this area is extremely complicated. The local government is practically powerless, and the gangs operate with impunity. Intervening here would be highly risky." The president straightened in his chair, his eyes sharp and filled with determination. "The greatest risk," he declared, "is doing nothing. If a child is brave enough to ask for help, then we must be brave enough to act. I want a plan, immediately." Less than 48 hours later, federal agencies began to mobilize, responding with precision and urgency. 3 strategic teams were deployed. First, a covert investigation unit was sent into the troubled town, blending in as locals to uncover critical intelligence. They mapped smuggling routes, tracked hidden warehouses, and identified corrupt officials who were aiding the operation. Second, a special task force prepared for a decisive raid, meticulously planning an assault on the gang strongholds, intending to strike a fatal blow to their network. Third, a reconstruction unit from the Department of Urban Development drafted plans for emergency relief, focused on restoring the town's broken infrastructure and providing essential supplies for the suffering residents. But as the covert team began its infiltration, it quickly became evident that the situation was far more intricate than anyone had anticipated. This wasn't merely a town under siege by a single gang. It was a critical hub in a sprawling transnational criminal network. Local officials were complicit, making the web of corruption and violence even harder to untangle. The covert team's initial report to the president was grim. "Sir," it warned, "this isn't just a town in crisis. It's a critical transit point in a vast criminal operation. If we fail here, the repercussions could extend far beyond this region." The president read the report with unwavering focus, his resolve hardening. "We're not just fighting gangs," he said firmly. "We're fighting to restore hope. I won't let Sophia or any child wait a moment longer for justice." Meanwhile, in the town, young Sophia remained oblivious to the grand plans unfolding. All she knew was that her mother's anxiety had grown worse. One night, unable to sleep, Sophia peered out of her bedroom window. Her heart raced as she noticed unfamiliar figures lingering in the shadows of the narrow streets. Something was changing. But was it the glimmer of hope or the prelude to a greater storm? As the covert team worked silently, they moved through the labyrinth of the town's alleys, carefully documenting every detail of the gang's operations. Smuggling routes, hidden warehouses, and the corrupt local officials aiding the criminals were slowly but methodically uncovered. But such changes didn't go unnoticed. Ramon, the gang's ruthless leader, sensed something was amiss. The once timid townspeople had started to look him in the eye, a small but unmistakable sign of defiance. It made his instincts flare with suspicion. "They're up to something," Ramon snarled, his sharp gaze sweeping over his gathered henchmen. "If we don't strike first, everything we've built will crumble." That night, the gang unleashed terror. The roar of truck engines echoed through the empty streets as Ramon issued a chilling command. "Abduct several townsfolk as a brutal warning. Let everyone know," he growled. "Helping outsiders will cost them everything." The chaos reached Sophia's home in the dead of night. She was startled awake by shouting and crashing outside. Rushing to the window, she froze in terror as she saw her mother being dragged into the back of a truck. "Mom!" Sophia screamed, her voice breaking in despair. But the darkness of the night swallowed her cries. The house felt unbearably empty, her mother's sweater draped over a chair, a haunting reminder of her helplessness. Sophia didn't cry. Instead, she clenched her fists, clutching the sweater tightly in her small hands. Her eyes blazed with determination. "I can't wait. My mom needs to be saved. This town needs to be saved," she whispered to herself. With resolve beyond her years, Sophia made her way to the investigation team's temporary base. Brave residents had begun working with the authorities, risking everything to help. Walking straight up to the commanding officer, Sophia stood tall, her voice steady but fierce. "I know where my mom is. I can help," she said firmly. The officer paused, momentarily taken aback. Before him stood not just a child, but a young warrior fueled by courage and resolve. He nodded slowly, understanding the depth of her determination. "We'll save them," he assured her, "but you have to promise to follow our instructions exactly." Sophia nodded without hesitation, her fear overshadowed by her resolve. That night, under the quiet cover of darkness, unmarked vehicles rolled into the town. Their headlights cut through the gloom, signaling the beginning of a decisive mission. The special task force was ready, not only to rescue the hostages, but to dismantle Ramon's entire criminal operation. As the vehicles moved silently, the team prepared to strike a balance between precision and force. This was not just a rescue mission, it was a battle to reclaim the town, to restore justice, and to reignite hope in the hearts of its people. Sophia watched from the shadows, her heart pounding but steady, knowing that the fight for her mother and her town was far from over. Would the mission succeed? Would the forces of courage and justice triumph over the darkness of fear and corruption? For Sophia, there was no question. This was her town's chance at redemption, and she would see it through to the end. Ramon raised a glass of wine inside his heavily fortified stronghold, surrounded by his most loyal henchmen. His laughter echoed through the room as he reveled in his sense of invincibility. To him, no one would dare challenge his reign of terror. He was utterly oblivious to the danger closing in from all sides. Outside, a specialized task force had carefully surrounded every possible escape route. The air was heavy with tension, waiting to explode into action. Suddenly, the silence was shattered. The main door burst open with a deafening explosion. Figures dressed in black stormed in like a whirlwind, their movements swift and precise. Ramon roared, his voice a mixture of anger and desperation. "Get them. No one escapes." Gunfire erupted almost immediately, the sharp cracks reverberating through the vast halls. Beams of light from flashlights cut through the darkness as the operatives moved with calculated precision, securing one room after another. But Ramon, ever cunning and resourceful, had no intention of surrendering. In the chaos, he slipped away through a hidden passage, making his way toward a concealed underground tunnel, his last desperate bid to escape. However, What he didn't know was that Sophia had anticipated this move. Guided by memories of her father's deliveries through the town's secret paths, she had tipped off the operatives, enabling them to block the final exit. As Ramon emerged from the tunnel, an operative's voice rang out like thunder. "Freeze! Drop your weapon!" Ramon turned slowly, a defiant smirk etched on his face. He raised his gun, his eyes gleaming with resistance, but before he could pull the trigger, a single, precise shot hit him. The weapon clattered to the ground as he collapsed, his reign brought to an unceremonious end. The lead operative stepped forward, securing handcuffs around Ramon's wrists. "Game over," he said firmly, signaling the conclusion of a long nightmare. As the sun began to rise, Sophia's mother and the other captives were led out of the stronghold. Their hands trembled with residual fear, but their faces were no longer masks of despair. Instead, tears streamed down their cheeks, tears of relief and freedom. In the distance, Sophia's mother caught sight of her daughter, her eyes filled with pride and love as she broke into a run, throwing her arms around Sophia. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You brought the light back to all of us." Sophia smiled but said nothing. In her heart, she knew this wasn't just her victory. It was a victory shared by everyone who had fought for it. As the new day dawned, Ramon and his remaining henchmen were escorted out of the town in a heavy, resounding silence. Meanwhile, trucks loaded with essential supplies, construction materials, and teams of experts began rolling in, heralding a fresh start for the community. For the first time in years, the sunrise brought not fear, but hope, a strange, almost unfamiliar sensation. Yet, the atmosphere remained cautious. Residents hesitantly stepped out of their homes, their eyes wary, as if fearing this newfound peace might vanish as quickly as it had come. Sophia stood in the town square, her small hand gripping her mother's tightly. Around them, federal workers began distributing clean water, food, and medical supplies. Despite the relief efforts, an uneasy stillness lingered. The weight of years of suffering could not be lifted overnight. Suddenly, a federal agent climbed the steps of the town's oldest, most dilapidated building. Raising his hand to command attention, he spoke with conviction. "We didn't just come here to rescue you. We came to help rebuild your lives, but this can only succeed if every one of you joins in. Together, we can make this town whole again." His words hung in the air, heavy with promise and challenge. From the crowd, an older man stepped forward. His voice trembled, but his words were resolute. "I've lived in fear for so many years. I used to think that staying silent would keep them away. But today, I see that silence is never the answer. I don't know where to start, but if we stand together, I believe we can make this work." A ripple of applause began, hesitant at first, but it quickly grew louder, stronger, more confident. Among the crowd, a young woman reached out and took Sophia's hand. Her voice was steady and warm. "You did what we couldn't bring ourselves to do. Now it's our turn." That very day, the townspeople began clearing away the debris of their shattered lives. Walls scarred by years of neglect became canvases of hope. Sophia and a group of children painted vivid images of doves, rising suns, and words of encouragement across the crumbling facades. At the first community meeting in years, people spoke openly about their dreams and needs. "I want to reopen my shop," said a man who had once run a small store, "but I'll need help to make it happen." Another voice chimed in, "If you need paint, I can help." The air buzzed with determination as the townsfolk pledged to rebuild their home, brick by brick, door by door. Sophia sat beside her mother, listening to the conversations unfold. For the first time, she felt hope quietly making its way back into the hearts of the people. Federal reconstruction teams worked diligently alongside the residents. Roads were repaired, schools rebuilt, and the long-abandoned hospital was finally restored. In time, the scars of the past began to fade, replaced by a vibrant, resilient spirit. What was once a town crushed by fear and silence had become a beacon of unity and renewal. And as Sophia watched children playing in the streets, their laughter ringing out like music, she realized something profound. True healing comes not just from the outside, but from within, from the courage to face the darkness and choose the light. A worker from the Department of Urban Development noticed Sophia one afternoon. She was standing quietly by a wall, her brush stroking bold colors across its blank surface. The man crouched down beside her, curious about her work. "What are you painting?" he asked gently. Sophia turned her head and pointed toward the mural, her small hand gesturing at a radiant sunrise stretching across a clear blue sky. "I'm painting our future," she replied with a quiet determination. "A day when we don't have to be afraid anymore." The man paused, studying the mural and then the hope in Sophia's eyes. A soft smile crossed his face. "You're absolutely right," he said. "But to make that happen, we need each other, don't we?" Sophia grinned, her smile infectious. "I think so. I can't do it alone, but if everyone works together, everything can change." The simplicity of her words struck the man deeply. Within weeks, those words began to echo throughout the town. Inspired by Sophia's mural and her quiet yet bold determination, the townspeople began to rebuild their community. Shops that had been abandoned for years reopened their doors. Schools, which had once sat eerily empty, prepared to welcome children again. Laughter, once a rare sound, returned to the streets as children ran and played where potholes had been repaired and sidewalks renewed. The community center, which had once been a crumbling, forgotten building, was transformed. Its walls were repaired, its roof restored, and it became a vibrant gathering place for events, celebrations, and shared hope. Above its main entrance, the townspeople erected a bold sign with large, hopeful letters. "Together we rise." Sophia stood beside her mother one afternoon, staring up at the sign. The two of them had been through so much, yet here they stood side by side, their hearts full of hope. An elderly woman approached Sophia and gently took her hand. "We used to think we were powerless," the woman said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "But you reminded us, even in the darkest of times, we can still find the light." Sophia's mother knelt down beside her daughter, wrapping her arms tightly around her. "You've done more than I ever dared to dream," she whispered through tears. "Sophia, you didn't just save me, you saved this whole town." Sophia smiled, her voice steady yet humble. "We did it, Mom, all of us together." As the golden light of the setting sun bathed the town in warmth, Sophia sat by her mural of the sunrise. Her eyes drifted toward the horizon, a faraway look filled with dreams of what could still be. She knew the journey wasn't over, but for the first time, the future didn't feel so far away. This town, once a forgotten shadow, was becoming a place of laughter, life, and renewal. The transformation wasn't just in the buildings or the streets, it was in the people. Months later, the town that had been shrouded in darkness looked entirely different. Streets once empty and lifeless now buzzed with energy as laughter and conversation filled the air. Doors that had remained shut for years now stood wide open, welcoming new life and new beginnings. In the town square, a special ceremony brought the community together. The crowd gathered in front of the newly restored building, now named the Sophia Community Center. Their eyes sparkled with hope as they looked upon their work, a testament to resilience and unity. Then, something remarkable happened. A helicopter descended slowly, landing in the square. Whispers of awe spread through the crowd as the president of the country stepped out. There was no grand entourage, no elaborate speeches, just him, standing humbly among the people who had once felt forgotten. He began to speak, his voice steady yet heartfelt. "The story of this town is a reminder to us all," he said, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. A small act, a flicker of light, when nurtured, can illuminate an entire community. Today, I don't just see a town reborn. I see a future where we all believe that nothing is impossible. The president turned to Sophia, who stood beside her mother, her eyes shining with quiet pride. "Sophia," he said warmly, "you've taught us a lesson we must never forget. A courageous heart can change the world." That day, the townspeople laid the first bricks for new projects, a school, a hospital, and other community buildings. But these efforts weren't just about physical restoration. They were about something much deeper: reclaiming trust, rebuilding relationships, and reigniting the hope that had been lost for so long. Sophia, though just a young girl, became a powerful symbol of transformation. Her letter, which had sparked the change, was framed and displayed in the community center. Beneath it were the simple yet profound words, "Great change often begins with small actions." And on what had once been the town's most desolate wall, a bold phrase was painted: "We have found the light again." Sophia's story may be fictional, but its lessons are real and timeless. In life, we may often feel too small to make a difference, but like Sophia, a single act, a spark of belief, can set into motion a change that transforms the world around us. As Sophia and her friends ran along the newly paved streets, their laughter echoed through the air. The American flag fluttered gently in the golden sunlight, a powerful symbol of a new beginning. This was no longer a forgotten town. It was a place where hope and trust could thrive once more. Together, we can make this world a better place. If this story touched your heart, please help us share its message. Like this video to support inspiring content. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that change is always possible. Leave a comment to tell us your thoughts or share a story that has inspired you. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that uplift and inspire. Hope begins with us. Let's rise together.